Dungeons & Dragons has very quickly risen to become one of nerds' new favorite hobbies. I'm even finding people on dating apps who have an express interest in Dungeons & Dragons, though it doesn't help me in finding any matches. Hell, even playing with pre-established friends is a pain. Everyone knows that the real BBEG of a campaign is the scheduling calendar. A close second is getting your players to actually respond to messages on time, so some of us have to swallow our fear and bite the bullet of becoming the DM. Being the DM is tough, especially if you have ADHD or some other executive functioning disorder like I do. You have to manage creating a world, filling it with NPCs, making a main narrative to follow along, provide character sheets for custom enemies, make on-the-fly adjustments, and try and make sure all of that actual gameplay content is actually fun for the players. I can do each of those things individually fairly easily, but if I had to do all of them at once, I'd feel obligated to ask for payment. So I took the most common shortcuts that most DMs use. I just steal as much content from the stories I like as possible. But unlike other DMs, I didn't want to bother mashing ideas from different stories together, and I didn't like taking credit from ideas I just stole wholesale from something else. So I gathered up my friends and asked a simple question. Hey, do you guys want to play a Genshin Impact D&D campaign? Actually, it was a similar system, Pathfinder 2nd Edition, since someone had made a really in-depth homebrew system porting the elemental reaction system from the game, and their response basically boiled down to, ugh, I'm not gonna play a Genshin Impact campaign. Genshin, along with all gachas, have quite reasonably gained a pretty negative reputation amongst people who don't play them. And people who do, too. Actually, it's a real League of Legends situation. Still, their response frustrated me, because I knew in my heart of hearts, if they didn't know it was a Genshin campaign, they'd play it and they'd have a great time. After some time had passed, I eventually realized that line of thought was exactly what I needed. All I'd do was host a Honkai Star Rail campaign, but I wouldn't tell them it was Star Rail. Then I'd keep the ruse running until around the end of Epilogue. At that point I'd tell them, presumably scold them for turning down my super fun Genshin campaign, then probably get them to play that instead, since there was homebrew made specifically for it. The biggest question in creating a Star Rail campaign is the main character syndrome. The Trailblazer specifically has plot importance in a very main character way. I couldn't just shove a Stella around inside all my players. Granted, I did only have 2 of them. They're both brothers who live only 10 minutes away from me, so hosting sessions wouldn't be a problem. I could add more people online, but I realized the online tabletop games are just really annoying to deal with, so I didn't bother. Still, I didn't want to make 2 Trailblazers, since it's kind of important that they have the newly created aspect of them. It would kind of kill the backstory possibilities. Not to mention it would be weird to have March and Don Hong always patrol the party, effectively making half the squad DM PCs. So, here's the plan. The Trailblazer, March 7th, and Don Hong have all been erased. So far, the only major story implications are related to the Xianzhou, but I'm sure that'll change as March gets stuff, and I'm not dealing with the Xianzhou stuff right now anyways. Instead, all of them will be replaced by the 2 player characters. And those players are Archon. She's a former IPC member who turned to the Express after a lack of satisfaction in their own life. She initially joined the IPC in an attempt to save dying planets, but she expected something a little bit more glamorous. You know those generic IPC guard enemies? She was one of them. She's a berserker, fighting with her bare hands or whatever other melee weapon she has still around. She'll take the enemy's punishment and dish it back twice as hard. Because if you want to rank up as a lower ranking IPC officer, you gotta prove your strength by showing your grit and pushing your limits. The other player character was Zindel, a biomechanical artificial life form created by Ron May, commissioned by the Sanctus Medicus, a being perfectly created to sustain the corruption of Mara while keeping their own sanity. To compensate for the corruption, Ron May installed shield generators inside of his body that prevent the Mara from leaking out and potentially infecting people. They just joined the Express before the campaign started, and they are blue. Zindel is an incredibly fast support character who excels at moving the party around when they're together and using their incredible speed to close the distance between his allies when they're split. They would have served the Trailblazer role well enough given their backstory, but I'd already committed to this creative decision before the player wrote it. And my initial decision actually has some pretty vast implications, so let's try and run them down. First, there's no connection with Kafka. It definitely makes her feel less special overall, but I don't think that's a huge problem. In canon, the Trailblazer only sees her for like 1 minute before losing their consciousness for the first time in their life. While we're on the prologue though, I should probably mention that we're skipping it entirely. We just didn't really know what the Express was doing on the Herta space station other than the Stellaron business and fighting off the Antimatter Legion. All we really miss, outside of that, is a cool introduction to Welt and that vision of the future. Oh yeah, the predestined fate stuff. No. I'm not gonna do that. I know it may seem extreme, given that's kind of the whole point of the Stellaron Hunters, but ask any experienced DM how they feel about a plot with a predetermined fate for the PCs. They'll quickly tell you that unless you take away so much agency away from the players that the game is no longer fun anymore, it's literally an impossible plot point to pull off. And that's not even mentioning the fact that we don't even know where that plot point is going. We don't know what the Stellaron Hunters are planning, and I don't know if my PCs will accidentally miss something or otherwise fuck something up in a way that I could have never predicted or even known to stop in the moment. Luckily, we're just doing Epilogue right now, so the whole deal with the Stellaron Hunters isn't really important. And with all that prep, it's time to start the first session. Part of me wanted to record this whole thing because I knew going into this that it would be a fire video idea, but DMing is hard and I don't want to add managing a camera on top of that, so story time it is. The first session started with me introducing the players to the other members of the Astral Express, Himiko, Welt, and Pom Pom. We also all agreed that since 2 players was pretty low and this was the first session so they weren't 100% confident with their character choices, that there may be others on board that they'll either swap out their player characters with or to just have another character to control. I very quickly realized that the experience of voicing characters can fluctuate from fairly fun to, oh god, oh no, please no, I'm never doing Pom Pom's voice again. It was so bad that I could barely get a sentence out without awkward laughter completely stifling my speech. I will never do that voice again. It was so bad that my players jokingly said that I should just kill him off immediately, because why would I create a character that I can't voice and seemingly kind of hate? Regardless, the players meeting the Astral Express was a pretty funny experience, since they were under the impression that the Astral Express was more like an adventurer's guild. It was, you know, a job with a boss and co-workers. Something very far from the Astral Express family dynamic that we're all used to. So, when they experienced the Astral Express's warm and welcoming atmosphere firsthand, they were really taken for a loop, and still thinking of the Astral Express as a job, one of the players mixed that initial impression with their attitude of their co-workers and said a truly magical phrase.
Archon, this is just like Smiling Friends.
I burst into laughter, something that would continue to happen throughout this first session particularly, because that statement was so out of the blue while remaining completely true. This ended up being one of the running bits throughout the campaign because we found out very quickly that Archon and Zadel basically exactly fit the mold of Charlie and Pim. One is the experienced and tired worker who just wants to get the job done and holds a very realistic mindset, while the other one is a more scatterbrained, innocent optimist who wants to help people as much as he can. Anyway, they get their situation explained to them after getting beamed down, and the plot of Epilogue properly begins. Begins with the introduction of Sampo, that is. Sampo was easily in the top 2 characters throughout my tabletop RPG Epilogue experience, and half of it is because I just love voicing him. He's got that voice that you just listen to for 2 seconds and you just know he's a rat bastard. And obviously, the players picked up on it instantly. Still, he had directions that could potentially help them out, so they decided to stick together anyways. Sampo serves a very important function mechanically. If there's only 2 players, it's very easy for them to just drop dead in combat. I can't throw that many enemies at them, which means the amount of variance in encounters also drops. If the players can't handle more than 3 guards, then I can really only get basic enemy combinations in groups of 3. And if I want to put in a mini-boss, come on, there's no shot. My solution to this, of course, is to give my players extra allies to control. The rules for controlling NPCs are simple. In combat, they get to control these characters unless they're having an RP moment. After partnering up with Sampo, they encounter some basic enemies. This is the introductory fight for my players to get used to their characters and their mechanics. The idea was that after this fight, they'd encounter Japard, and they would immediately get an example of such an RP moment by Sampo just dipping mid-combat. But one of the fun parts of running a session with a pre-written plot is that things won't always go according to Elio's script, so to speak. They end up actually spotting Japard's patrol team from afar, and then succeed in sneaking around them. This was a slight problem because I intended for them to get caught, so I didn't plan on them needing to sneak in. Sure, I could just run a simple stealth check, but it would feel weird if I didn't at least prepare an explanation for how they sneak in. I pulled from my brain the rotating bridge puzzle near the end of Epilogue and used that as a reference. We're gonna need a visual for this. Take a circle, hollow it out, then cut out a piece of it. This is one of the side entrances to Epilogue seen from above. Just add some thick walls to either side. This is a rotating pillar. When it's fully closed, the exposed part is facing towards a wall. Sambo has used this exact entrance to sneak in and out of Epilogue before, and he knows that there's a bunch of machinery inside just next to the pillar, right here. So, if they sneak through the moment the door starts to become exposed to the other side, then they can start moving from here to here, right behind cover. The logic isn't flawless, or even really good, but I literally came up with it in 30 seconds, so bite me. Either way, the players were able to successfully realize that there's really no reason for the city of Epilogue to not let them in. People only go outside the city's borders if they're professionals or exiled. So if they just wave towards a guard, they'll be let in, have a background check run on them, and once they confirm that they are in fact not criminals, then they'll just be let in. So they just deny following Sampo inside. Plus, they knew he was suspicious, so they really didn't want to be seen with him. In fact, their suspicions about him were way worse than he actually was. They even jokingly mentioned that he might be a offender, which is just an insane anecdote that I had to share with you guys. Them denying him really ends up confusing the little scamster, but he ultimately can't convince them to follow along, so he just decides to keep him helping the others sneak around the patrol as only half a favor. Anyway, let's see how that went out for him. So he immediately trips over the equipment he was meant to hide behind. Uh-oh. Get him! So the players managed to get in on their own, while avoiding the reputation deficit of being seen with Sampo. They were given a heads up that they'd be seeing the Supreme Guardian soon by the guards, and they're allowed to wander the city in the meantime. This is normally when the players of Star Rail will be railroaded through a variety of cutscenes introducing the place, but this is a tabletop RPG, so there's no way I'm gonna do that. The good part of this is that the pacing is 100 times better. The bad part is that they never bothered to visit Serval because nothing pressing was prompting them to. Oops. One funny thing is that the players pointed out that because Jarilo-VI was isolated from the global economy, their currency didn't experience whatever super space inflation that's been going on throughout the past couple of centuries. So, food was basically so cheap that it was free. Funny stuff. After wandering around for a bit, they were brought to Cocolia's office. I should probably note that I didn't exactly study the scripts for people's monologues because I'm not built like that. Still, their discussion goes mostly as normal. Cocolia points out that they can't mobilize for the Stellaron immediately, since it has the tendency to move around. But they should be ready by tomorrow. She then prompts the players to leave to the hotel while she privately discusses the future with Branya. That last action in particular was incredibly suspicious to the players. To be clear, I didn't try and amp up this suspicion on her delivery or anything like that. The players just genuinely noticed that it's really strange to have her discuss with Branya privately when there's no real reason to leave them out of the conversation. Which is really nice. I'm glad they picked up on that. They got the idea that she might be the antagonist, despite there being no scene where she basically turns to the camera and goes, "I am the antagonist, I'm crazy," like in the original. Because of their suspicion of Cocolia, they decided to get the townsfolk's opinions on her. Archon had a situation where she was trying to get the vibe of the townsfolk. Not what they thought, but what they felt about the Supreme Guardian. So she goes up to a child, a little girl, and crouches down to her, directly in front of her face, and asks,
"Are you scared right now?"
So that became another running bit that started in the first session. It's also, amazingly, how they found out about the underworld, since the little kid got the idea that Archon might have been from there. Soon after, they were able to find some mostly sealed off entrances, and combined with the comment that the kid had made to them, they were able to uncover quite a bit more about Belobog on their own. Madame Cocolia was incredibly suspicious, but she did give them housing in the hotel. The players could have decided to sleep somewhere else or something if they were that suspicious of her. But they were hung up on a more pressing matter. See, the question in their mind had nothing to do with Cocolia or the underworld, but it did have to do with the city. Something about this hotel is strange.
Wait, why is there a hotel?
What do you mean, why is there a hotel here? It's a city.
Yeah, the last city on a dying planet. I mean, what's the point of a hotel? There's no visitors coming in from here. I don't see if there's a need for temporary housing. You're telling me that people have housing for their citizens and just aren't using it? It's an apocalypse.
At this point, I had the incredible opportunity to experience the feeling of needing to explain a plot hole that I didn't write. I gave an explanation later linking the underground and the overworld hotels, saying that because there's multiple towns within the underground, it's necessary there. But that's not happening on the surface world because it just doesn't make sense. For the initial session, I just gave up and said, I didn't think of that, because what else are you supposed to do in that situation? They go to sleep at the hotel, and the first thing they hear when they wake up is, "Open up, you're under arrest." And that is how I end the first session. Despite all the troubles I ran into, this was actually one of the best sessions I've ever had. And a huge chunk of it was because I ran into so many issues that I got to improv my way out of. And the only reason why I could do that was because I already had so much story content to fall back on. So moving forward, part of me was actually really scared that they would drop the game when I revealed the truth to them, because this really felt like my ideal way of running future sessions. But I also didn't really want to take credit for someone else's story. It was a pretty interesting balance of priorities going on in my head at the time. But the result was ultimately to just keep running the game as best as I could and trust that nothing horrible would happen. 1 week later, and we start session 2. It starts with a combat scene, obviously. In the original Star Rail, the guards chase them out of the hotel and down the streets, with the Astral Express having to fight through waves of enemies before eventually becoming overrun and exhausted so Sampo can save them in the end. After all, he does owe them a favor for distracting Japard, which actually didn't end up happening. Luckily, I had a bit of foresight and snuck in some dialogue last session from the guards, implying that he somehow got away from that massive fuck-up getting back into the city. But there's still another problem. Forcing the players to move long distances in combat organically can be really difficult, especially given certain circumstances that I can't explain right now. But mostly it's because I don't want to make multiple maps, and I personally thought that setting the entire combat inside just the hotel was a bit more interesting anyways. The basic idea of the encounter was that I'd give them way too many enemies to deal with, as well as add in Bronya there as a full boss enemy to really hammer in the fact that they are not winning this fight head on, and then switch their objective from defeating everyone to simply escaping the hotel. By the way, if you want to do an encounter like this, I would not shy away from just telling the players straight on, you aren't winning this fight. The two are placed on the second floor in different hallways, each with guards outside their doors. They could fight their way through the hallways and then book it through the main lobby. Or they could bust through the floor beneath them, potentially landing right next to the exit, but taking an absurd amount of fall damage in the process. I mean, just look at how tall this ceiling is. I was also sure to actually explain these two potential strategies to them, since busting through the floor is a bit of an esoteric solution to this problem. Archon, being the bruiser that she is, decided to bust through the floor, while Zendel, who I learned is significantly more slippery than I thought, was able to run past the guards in the hallway. There was a particularly clutch moment near the end of the encounter where Archon was being held down next to the door, while Zendel had to slip past Bronya's gaze because she actually had ways to immobilize them instantly. But with a really clutch roll, they were able to avoid Bronya's gaze and open the path for Archon for them to both slip out of the hotel one right after another, all in the same turn. Afterwards, cutscene mode happens. The players were chased off into the street. They tried to move in the direction of one of the less sealed off entrances to the underground, but they just weren't able to shake the guards at all. Luckily for them, they had a bit of an unclear deal with a certain criminal before. And as an honest snake oil salesman, Sampo Koski doesn't do half favors. Smoke bombs drop, everyone falls unconscious, and Sampo takes everyone to the underground, all as per Elio's script. Now he can say that they owe him a full favor. That type of clarity is necessary for a good business relationship, after all. Archon and Zendel wake up next to each other, since they were both taken in by Natasha. They're able to quickly piece together where they are by asking Natasha some quick questions. So, they decide to look for the purple rat that brought them here. Unfortunately, Sampo happened to be doing what he does best, disappearing completely, without telling anyone. So, the players just had to wander around the underground aimlessly. Perfect for world building. So they explore the local food, meet some kids, try and look for a way out, that sort of stuff. And no, they didn't interact with Hook, although I did mention her offhandedly. Archon ends up finding Bronya getting ganged up on before her soon-to-be girlfriend Seal saves her. Much like in the original cutscene, it doesn't turn into a combat encounter or anything. Archon asks her what she's doing here. She said she was also kidnapped, which is reasonable. She then asked if she's seen Sampo since she woke up. I figure, much like the players, she hasn't seen him either. So this character, Bronya, was knocked out with gas, taken away from her home, and she just woke up in the middle of the city with no knowledge of what happened to her while she was asleep. He might be a offender? Which is just an insane... The Twitlongers were in full effect. The allegations against Sampo hit their peak right here. I mean, I can't really blame them, but like, what was I supposed to tell them? That Sampo just dumped her in the middle of the city for shits and giggles? I mean, in hindsight, it would have been possible for her to have also been at Natasha's lab, and that she just woke up way before the players, but I didn't think of that. So the most reasonable conclusion that the players could come up with involved going all in on the bit. This even got to the point where Archon's player just referred to him as Drake when he couldn't remember his name. It's this kind of tonal dissonance that I knew was going to happen when I started this campaign. And honestly, as amusing as it is, I do want to at least try and keep it close to the original's tone. That absolutely insane bit aside, there was one other important matter to attend to. Asking Bronya why they were actually under arrest. It's at this point where Cocolia's character changes a fair bit. Since I didn't go back and do my research for any individual scene in the campaign, some of the details of her character and motivation were changed simply because I couldn't remember everything and invented whatever made sense to me at the time. I noticed that her original approach in the first encounter was to feign ignorance about the Stellaron and basically say, "I don't believe you'd help us," which doesn't seem like much of a reason to not lead strangers into the eye of the storm. I mean, worst case scenario, they just die, right? Unless you believe that they're somehow powerful enough to make the storm worse, and would profit from making it worse, and also not believe they'd help you for whatever reason. I mean, I really cannot think of any utility, any instance in which any group would have any benefit from just making the storm worse and just leaving. So instead, I went in a different direction. If the Astral Express is so well known throughout the universe and has ties to clearly ancient history, being that it's also closely related to an Aeon, why not say the same thing about the Celeron Hunters? So, on top of the Supreme Guardian knowing the vague details about the Astral Express, they'd also have similar information about the Stellaron Hunters. So that vague, "I don't believe you'd help us," turns into, "I don't think you're who you say you are." I mean, sure, they showed their badge, and they know they have those badges, but they're not authorities on knowing if they're fake or not. It doesn't mean anything to them. I realize in hindsight that the Stellaron Hunters haven't had nearly the history that the Astral Express has, meaning this explanation isn't perfect. But hey, I mean, it's not impossible that certain distress signals warning the whole galaxy about a new super dangerous terrorist group could have accidentally made it on their radio frequencies. I mean, they did get an invitation to a tournament in the Luminary War Dance Ceremony event, so it could have been a similar scenario as that. Maybe. Whatever. Point is, Bronya doesn't trust them much either. It's true that she is more optimistic than her mother, but an order is an order, and she doesn't want her disobedience to be potentially the thing that gets the planet destroyed. Plus, she's been isolated from the underground for as long as she can remember, so much like in the original, she wants to see how good, or rather how bad, things are down here. So she ended up splitting from the party. Meanwhile, the Astral Express duo got the chance to try out the Underworld's cuisine. I inaccurately assumed that the food stall present in Belobog was on the surface, so I thought the food available were examples of what the Overworlders would eat. So I actually had to improvise what the Underworlders' food was, even though I actually got the two groups of food mixed up. Point is, I improvised it as basically anything that can preserve well or is simple to make. Plus, to add in a bit of spice, implement some cave theming wherever I could. I gave my players that vague direction because I couldn't think of anything on the spot, and it just so happens that during this session I brought tortilla chips. So that became the cuisine of the underground, which resulted in this just fantastic RP moment happening.
You know they make these things out of cave fungus? Everything's cave fungus down here. That's all they got.
Oh, yeah, I noticed that.
Yeah, and they use lots of salt too.
Oh,
That seems like a normal amount of salt.
yeah, no, I think it tastes pretty normal.
Oh, wait, so, okay. Do they have salt on the, do they have chips on the surface world? I don't know, I've never been there. Or at least I haven't really...
They got chips
food
everywhere. Like every planet has chips.
Every planet?
Yeah.
Yeah, they fed my tortilla chips through a test tube. Those ones didn't have salt. They didn't have a lot of things.
They don't usually do that.
Well, I figured...
Yeah, no, that was... I've learned that's kind of the exception.
I don't know, I figured that there'd be more, like food would be more plant-like, you know? Like...
Yeah,
It is
they
a
just
plant.
also have put salt on their plants.
Salt?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. I just sort of figured, because, you know, where we live underground.
No, yeah.
We have, like, the cave fungus and stuff. We have lots of, like, mining mineral operations, right? I just sort of figured...
Yeah. No, salt's pretty common, and it's pretty commonly used.
Every planet has plants and rocks, and those are like the two ingredients of a chip.
Huh.
Yeah.
That's weird to think about.
But, you know, the cave fungus, that was pretty novel.
Oh, it is?
Yeah, the cave fungus.
Huh. Yeah, you know, I figured that would be more normal because that's the most amount of plant we have down here.
No, most people don't live in caves, so that's pretty, I think that's pretty unique to your culture.
But
Some people live in caves.
That's true, yeah, they do, but they don't always use
okay,
cave fungus
so-
for their chips.
I've had to beat up a few people who live in caves.
Did they use cave fungus chips? Did they have those?
They didn't really have much food in general. Those
so
people,
Okay.
wait, so the salt, but salt comes from underground. It's rocks. So how would...
Yeah.
It shows up in water.
It shows
all
up
the
in water. They
Oh. I didn't
people
know
on other
that.
planets mine. No, yeah. Salt's pretty common.
Anyways, back to the present. Seal ran into the party when they were done exploring Boulder Town. She led them back towards Natasha because she needed some help. Natasha explains that she is the leader of Wildfire. I cut Oleg because we don't have time and I don't care. She explains the general political situation on Belobog and invites them to join Wildfire, saying that if they assist the underground, they can cause a rebellion on the surface, giving them enough time to contain the Stellaron during or after the raid topside. Archon is not too pleased with her offer, not because she doesn't agree with the rebellion herself, but more because she didn't ask for this. All she wanted to do was come down to Jarilo-VI, contain the Stellaron, and leave with as little of a trace on this planet as possible. Starting a rebellion in the last surviving city on the planet is the exact opposite of that. But her opinions weren't voiced. Why? Because it's her new friend's first adventure, of course. Archon was specifically instructed to give authority to Zendel whenever possible. Obviously make sure they don't get themselves killed, but generally speaking, leave the shot calling to them. Fun fact, this is actually why the two paired up with Sampo initially, despite the fact that they were both suspicious of him. Zendel thought he'd be an okay lead at the time. And it's not like she disagrees with the rebellion plot going on right now anyways. Zendel was obviously much more eager to participate in the plot. He empathized with the Underworlders, given that he had literally just escaped from the hands of the Denizens of Abundance, who literally ruled over them since birth. So, the decision was made, and the players were sent out to observe Svarog's roadblock. Not only did they find a variety of robots attending to the blockade, but they also found Svarog himself. With Clara, of course. The players gently interrogate Clara to see if she's with Svarog willingly or not. They quickly find out that their bond is genuine. So the players ask Svarog why he wanted to keep the Underworlders underground. He explained that with all the data he had collected, if the Underworlders were to reach topside, they'd cause a full-on civil war. Not only that, but there would be an overwhelmingly high chance that they would lose. Given that his primary objective is to protect the people of Belobog, both the Over- and Underworlders, he can't let that come to pass. The players generally agree with his statement, but internally they know they have to get back to the Overworld, so they just ended up leaving for Boulder Town to report back to Natasha. But they were stopped just before they left. Svarog has a comprehensive list of everyone in the Underground, but he doesn't have them. Of course, they're probably both just from the Overworld, so he asks about their identity. They both decide to keep the Astral Express thing a secret since it didn't work so well last time. They both say they're milkmen up in the Overworld, which is really funny because I don't know if they even have milk up there. Svarog logs that info anyways, the party leaves, and thus ends session 2. It turns out the players really liked the combat session we had, and the integration of the Underground. They also recognize that Bronya clearly has a lot more going on than she lets on, and she likely isn't that bad of a person. Also, as a personal anecdote, playing Svarog was kind of awkward, and I didn't sound nearly as cool as the character himself probably should have deserved, but I didn't hate the experience. Overall, not that much needs to be discussed here. So, that means we're going on to... Session 3 was a trip. If you thought sessions 1 and 2 were eventful, wait until you hear about what happens here. Okay, so to summarize, the party finds Seal and Bronya, the four group up together, and then they head back to the construction site to claim that ground, and fight some robot mooks together. That's it. So what's with the hype? Well, all of the actual content was inside the fight itself. No, it's not because anyone died. And it's not because the story's direction was changed massively either. Basically everything went back to Elio's script right after this. It's because this seemingly innocent combat session lasted 5 real-world hours. How did this happen? The answer is sort of difficult to explain, but it's also the same thing I've been tiptoeing around this entire video. And now's the perfect time to explain myself. See, we weren't playing Dungeons & Dragons. We were playing quite possibly the best tabletop RPG for action anime campaigns of all time. We were playing Panic at the Dojo. And listen, I haven't played a lot of tabletop RPGs, only D&D 5th edition, 2nd edition, 3.5, Pathfinder 1 and 2e, Shadowrun 5th edition, and Mutants and Masterminds. Which I know sounds like a lot for the people who only play Dungeons & Dragons, but many of these I've only played around 2 to 3 sessions each, with 5th edition and Pathfinder 1e being the main exceptions. Although now I can put Panic at the Dojo on the same list. The basics of the system work like this. Your character will have 3 stances, with each stance consisting of a form and a style, each one with their own passive and active abilities. Styles determine the range of your stance, while forms determine your action dice, which you roll at the start of your turn, and you spend those values on the actions that you take. But with 12 forms and 65 styles to choose from, how can a new player possibly find a combination just for them? It's actually pretty easy, because most of those styles are sorted into 13 archetypes. These are your classes, so to speak. Zindel is a focused cavalry character. Focused, meaning they only took a single archetype, getting a strong passive at the cost of being limited to the styles only available in that archetype. Cavalry is a fast supportive archetype that's able to spam shields, which is basically temporary HP, and maneuver yourself and your allies around quickly. Zindel was particularly good at giving lots of weakness tokens to enemies, which would reduce the damage on their attacks, while stacking iron tokens on their allies, which allowed them to negate damage at a flat rate. This is really important because the HP value is actually equal for every single character on the field, meaning iron tokens and shields are the most reliable way to make sure your character has more survivability. Well, it's actually only the second most reliable way, but we'll get to that soon enough. Archon is a fused angel punk. Fused meaning she had 2 archetypes, with Angel being a tanky archetype focused on challenging enemies, basically taunting them, forcing them to either remove the challenge token that they now hold, or target Archon with their actions for that turn. While Punk is a bruiser archetype that gets an extra action each turn, with said action's value increasing depending on how much damage she's already taken. She was primarily built for bleeding style, which is a punk style that made it so that you didn't get knocked out when you were reduced to 0 HP, which isn't as overpowered as it sounds, actually, because the game is specifically created to have an even action economy no matter what the situation is. Regardless if you're outnumbered or vice versa, the enemy and ally sides will always take the same amount of turns. Even when a character's taken out, they still choose their stance and roll their action dice. They just give the values that they rolled to one of their still standing allies. Still, bleeding style would be removed in future versions, and that's one of the primary pain points of our campaign, actually. Patch notes. After nearly every single session that we had, we found out that there was some new update that we hadn't fully implemented yet, with these patch notes showing up as patch notes instead of fully implemented new documents, meaning we had to bounce between documents quite a lot. The 1.0 and the latest patch, and then if there was another patch after that, we had to go download that and then toss up what we had before, and then we had to see if anything was different from any of the character builds. It was a huge mess. Luckily, by the time this video has been released, I can guarantee that 2.0 is completed, or at least in a playable beta state, so you won't have this issue if you decide to pick up the game. Still, these in-between patches had really substantial changes, like the change for armor, for instance. Initially, armor used to remove a flat 1 damage from every single damage instance you received, so it was used to counter stances that focused on lots of small attacks. One way that you could counter this is by using actions that ignore armor entirely, but let's be honest with ourselves, the far more intuitive answer is to use less hits for more damage. Given that power form is a form and not a style, you didn't need to take a specific archetype in order to use it, meaning it was one of the simplest and most reliable ways to counter armor in this version of the game. So, going into this little combat, my players were still learning to use power tokens, with Seal being the only character who took power form, and half the enemies had armor. Now, Seal proved herself to be exceptionally strong throughout this campaign, like 1.0 star rail strong, but that didn't really help much for the length of this encounter, because I was also implementing my own homebrew for adding super tokens into the game, which was meant to implement fighting game-like super meter for the characters, meaning every single time someone did damage, they had to calculate how much super meter they were generating. This, plus the fact that they took Bronya along, which I didn't expect, meaning I had to add an extra enemy to the pool so they can get an extra turn, making it a 4v4 instead of a 3v3, and the fact that none of these people had ever controlled Seal or Bronya in a fight before. I mean, sure, they encountered Bronya at the hotel, but it's not like they are paying attention to every single one of her special abilities, which now is required. Meanwhile, Seal had never been in a combat before at all during this campaign. With all of these problems, I think you can get the idea of how this might have taken so long. After 5 hours of grueling, slow gameplay, we obviously decided to end the session there. But what's this? It looks like there was a new patch that we forgot to apply before the session. This was always a common occurrence and generally considered pretty annoying for my players, but most of the time it was for the benefit of the game. But imagine what we were thinking when this was the first thing that we see. Major change, HP overhaul. Fights were too short, so the HP value for Hellfire has been increased by 50%. I had to read this out so many times. I fucking laugh every single time. Our table was already mentally done, but this reveal plunged us into the depths of tilt that should only be reachable by playing ranked League of Legends. It was sheer exhausted chaos. My players took a stand, saying there is no way they would ever play on this patch, and that the game designer was crazy for making this change. It wasn't all bad though. In this exact same patch, armor was heavily nerfed. Instead, it would only proc once per turn. In return, it would increase the flat damage reduction to 3, meaning it would actually become good at countering single large hits as opposed to lots of smaller ones. This was literally the only thing that convinced my players to update to this version of the game, and honestly, I really can't blame them. As we moved on to session 4, we all agreed that it would be for the best to just leave out combat completely for the session if it was possible. Normally, I would explain how Panic at the Dojo's social systems work at this point, but I actually decided that it didn't fit with how I wanted the out-of-combat gameplay to be, so that part actually was D&D. The only real difference was that we swapped some skills around to fit the more sci-fi space opera theme, and we actually also removed perception because it's really obnoxious to deal with a role that didn't go according to plan. If it's important that the players see something, they see it. If it's important that they don't, they don't. Anything in between, and hey, they won't feel the need to roll perception just in case. So yeah, that not one joke back on Sampo's part, that wasn't hyperbole. He actually did roll a 1 on his stealth check. For session 4, I made a decision that I wouldn't normally make. I'd try to extend the story. Our path was going so smoothly along, I wanted to be able to include a bit more underground content before moving on to the Svarog fight, since after that point, the story would quickly accelerate to the climax. All the lore I had planned initially didn't feel like enough for a full session's worth. Everything I initially wanted to include basically boiled down to gathering materials with Bronya and giving away her badge. So I decided to slot in content from Natasha's story quest as well. The session starts with the players and NPCs regrouping at Boulder Town, getting ready for their next mission. But before they could lead an assault on Svarog's base, Wildfire will need some medical supplies, since they're running incredibly low right now. Meanwhile, the players are learning about a suspicious miracle medicine from a different doctor located in an adjacent town. But it had an inconsistent track record. Sometimes people would be cured completely, while others would suffer from debilitating side effects, like loss of memory. The patients took this as a reasonable risk. After all, in the underground, you have to risk your life nearly every other day anyways. So the potential reward of curing basically any disease is easily worth it to them. Although, they tell the players to not tell Natasha about this, since she's had a bad rap with this medicine before. This medicine used to be sold by her brother, and after some family drama occurring stemming from her disagreeing with his practices, he was never seen again. The players didn't believe that this was the full story, so they decided to tell her about the miracle medicine anyway, though not ask about her brother. Natasha informed them that the true effect of this medicine was short-term memory loss. People with less severe conditions would take it, and then forget for long enough that they had a condition until their diseases wore off. anyone with anything more serious suffered from horrible memory loss far beyond the medicine's expected duration. They became unable to take care of themselves, and without help from their family and friends, they would quickly die of normally very preventable causes. So the players ended up rolling up to where the alternative medicine was being sold. They then kicked in the face of the quote-unquote guards so fast that I didn't even bother gracing them with a combat encounter. But once they stepped inside, they found nearly all the supplies were already gone. But they weren't already used, they were stolen. With sloppily hidden footprints leading their way to the thief, they found a kid. His name is Eric, and Steele knows this kid. He's a pretty notorious thief for his age, anyways. With him holding on to the alternative medicine, he's planning on selling it to a party at a higher price. His parents are hungry and they need food. They're too old to work, while Eric is too young. If you're familiar with the main story quest, you know where this is heading. Bronya ends up giving her badge to the kid, saying that selling her badge will be enough to purchase food for his parents for years to come. But this exchange won't be just for the medical supplies, but also for the promise to never steal from anyone else ever again. Seal, as well as the players, consider that to be too optimistic, and Bronya agrees. Logically speaking, it's an incredibly stupid decision. She's giving up something that has unimaginable sentimental value to a known thief in hopes that he just won't steal again on his own word. But she didn't do this because she's overly optimistic or stupid. She knows that this is a huge risk, but unlike everyone else in the underground, she actually has the privilege to put this much trust into someone who would normally be given up on. It's at this moment that Bronya shows that she really does have the heart of a leader and is truly ready to lead the nation of Belobog. But this scene was a bit contrived. I sort of had to move it along really quickly before either of my players remembered that in comparison to literally everyone else in Belobog, they were just completely loaded. Remember that bit about superinflation during the first session? Yeah, if the players just paid the little guy off, we wouldn't have gotten this moment. Luckily, they completely forgot about that detail, and we were able to move things on pretty smoothly from there. Afterwards, the party returned to Natasha with the materials, and she explained to them that while these drugs weren't useful in their current state, she could break them down into their more base components and reform them to make some actual medicine. Why did these drugs have such useful base components? Because its initial use wasn't to give people memory loss. See, her brother was also a doctor like herself, and a well-respected one at that. Operating on the top side of Belobog alongside his sister, Natasha eventually left him to support those in the underworld. This led to them being apart for several years with minimal communication. Over time, her brother changed. He became obsessed with the idea of conquering the cold. After all, to the people of Belobog, the ice storm that ravaged their planet was natural and everlasting. It wasn't the storm's fault for ravaging this planet, no, the planet was simply always like this. Rather, it's a flaw of humanity for not being able to traverse through the snow and expand their empire. So he tried everything he could to rid the human body of its weakness to the snow, even altering the most fundamental parts of the immune system. Every subject that he'd experiment on would suffer catastrophic side effects. Eventually, he ran out of money to continue his experiments. He tried to take out loans, but he was excommunicated from the scientific community entirely, lost his medical license, everything. But the underworld? Underground, there was no need for degrees, schooling, or any credentials. If you could survive, you did. So he moved down with his dear sister and became known as the Miracle Doctor, giving his medicine away for absolutely free. Of course, this medicine was just more of his experimental drugs, combined with the memory loss effects to attempt to keep the truth hidden from his subjects. But his ruse didn't last forever. When Natasha found out about it, she confiscated all of the materials she could find. He begged to let him keep his materials for just one last experiment, but she refused. Until she heard that the experiment would be conducted on himself. He was sure that he had solved the mystery behind the human's weakness to the cold. He just needed to give himself the medicine and venture into the cold himself. She allowed him this one last shot, knowing what the result would already be. They went to the borders of Epilogue, and she saw him disappear into the snow, never to be seen again. But that's all in the past now. What's in the past should stay there. It's not like it has any relevance with what's going on right now, anyways. Foreshadowing is a literary device, so anyways, now the party should be ready to fight Svarog. With that established, we ended the session there. This was also the time that the last patch before 2.0 had dropped, so after this point, we wouldn't run into any more patch issues for the rest of the campaign. Until I remembered about the add-on stuff, but I only gave that stuff to the enemies, so it's not like my players had to edit their own character sheets. And it's boss fight time. The gang, including the 4 playable characters plus Sampo, approach Svarog's castle? Home base? Svarog's home base. I decided that, outside of preparing Svarog's character sheet, of course, I'd do no additional session prep, because normally there's like a rapping robot and different trials to get in, and I didn't want to remember all that. I figured my players would end up in a funnier situation through their sheer imagination. So here's what happens. There was a gate, so naturally Archon immediately tried to climb it. I didn't want it to be that easy, so I made it electrical. Problem is, Archon is a punk. She's supposed to be able to eat damage. Plus, for her out-of-combat skills, she put a ton of her points on a Constitution. Astute D&D players know that there are literally no skills that use Constitution, meaning she spent a bunch of stat points into a literally useless stat. So, fine. Fuck it. She manages to get her way over it, but I'm not going down that easily. She tries to open it from the other side? Well, now there's a password. That should stall her for a little while. That lets the other players go off into the main camp to try and find someone to go and open the gate for them. There really aren't any clues from this side of the gate, so Archon has a funny idea. She decides to simply go inside. The gate is their main form of defense, so the front door is unlocked. Presumably Clara forgot to lock it. Svarog doesn't technically know that they're part of Wildfire yet. They've only had that one interaction, after all, and since I forgot to let Seal tag along with them the first time, he's never technically seen them as an opposing force. Sure, they beat up everyone holding up the blockade, but there were no survivors amongst the robots, and all the humans just ditched them, meaning nobody really knows they're part of Wildfire yet. Unless, in the shadows, all this time, there was someone keeping watch. There wasn't. I didn't think of that at the time. So Archon's able to roll up to Svarog and Clara's place, saying that she accidentally slipped in and she needs him to open the gate. I don't know where this is going, considering the party wasn't waiting for her on the other side, and even if they were, he would figure out she was with Wildfire, meaning that he would just be able to keep the gate shut, and whatever. None of that even ended up mattering anyways, because she ended up spilling the beans right there and then. She wanted to have an honest conversation with Svarog to try and figure out if they could unite against the Supreme Guardian. He refuses, obviously, saying that the underworld strength isn't enough to fight Cocolia. But Archon says that with her and Zindel's strength, they could be enough to tip the tides. Svarog says the chance of that happening is statistically insignificant. So, Archon reveals that she and Zindel are part of the Astral Express. Svarog, looking into his databank, admits of having knowledge of the Astral Express, but has no way of verifying their strength. There is no need. I am the trial.
This fucking guy.
Svarog opens the gate to let the party in to prepare them for the boss fight. To acknowledge the party's strength, he will fight them directly. With Seal and Bronya too. In hindsight, I maybe should have made this combat a 1v2. Maybe still include Bronya, because he might not have statistics on her, but either way, including Seal was an oversight on my end. I was more concerned about how I would port Svarog's moveset to our game. Anyone who's fought Svarog will tell you that the most defining part of the boss fight is these fucking hands. Their only purpose is to grab one party member and never let go, unless you break the hands with an elemental weakness. And oh lord, as someone going through this fight pre-Firefly, this fight is absurdly frustrating if you don't have a good source of break for these hands specifically. The fight feels super oppressive, so I wanted to see if I can replicate this oppressive feeling by using a bit of the expansion's content. The Shark archetype is based around grappling the opponent and locking them down by stacking fatigue tokens, which is the opposite of speed tokens, which is your primary resource for moving your character around. I made Svarog's remote hands 2 separate units with a shared HP bar, each with a passive that constantly sucked in the surrounding enemies if they don't spend more speed tokens than normal. They also have a weird version of dance form that constantly generated speed tokens on enemy turns. That never ended up making it to 2nd edition, probably because, as we figured out in this battle, it was incredibly annoying. It basically pulled Zindel away from combat for half the encounter. But I didn't want this fight to be just frustrating. The players had the opportunity to do something really exciting, since I had just given each of them a unique super. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let's describe the plan for the encounter. One of the special mechanics of Panic at the Dojo is that before combat begins, the players get the opportunity to decorate the map with obstacles, and then the director gets to react and place even more. The players decided to make basically a choke point in the center of the normally mostly open arena. I decided I'd lean into this decision, with the idea that the hands will cause havoc on the outside, making sure only 1 or 2 people can duel him at a time, and he'll just stat check the 2 that are fighting him. My decision was calculated, but man, am I bad at math. They low-key rocked his shit. The only thing that prevented them from completely dumpstering him was his Siphon Style's unique action, making it impossible for either of them to get a super off, which was really frustrating for them, especially because they were just given these supers, and this was the perfect opportunity for them to use them. Overall, I think the Svarog boss fight ended up being more frustrating than difficult or intimidating, which is a real shame. I didn't even get a moment where Svarog steals a bunch of the super tokens to immediately launch back a super, because my players were smart enough to just constantly spend their super tokens just before he would get the opportunity to. Well, at least I got the chance to redeem myself with Cocolia. But before that, starting in... I'm not gonna lie, I genuinely forgot I was doing these transitions. That's why the cut was so abrupt. But while I've got you here, can you subscribe? This took me, if you count the campaign itself, over a year. And I'm recording this at the point in which I edited to this part of the video. So I'm only barely halfway done. Oh god. But if I get clout, maybe I could even run some Star Rail campaigns live. But, you know, right now I'm just some guy. Nobody's gonna collab with me. Unless this video pops off. Which I don't expect, but, you know, it'd be nice. Starting in session 6, we get some more lore. I ended up placing the Bronya backstory stuff after Svarog here because I forgot it was before that stuff. Whoops. In my opinion, though, I think it works way better placed here, since Bronya is about to go off on her own to confront Cocolia. I thought the orphanage scene was really good already, but I decided to add a Chosen One legend to Belobog's folklore, reading, "A child of Belobog will be the fire that wades off the Fragmentum storm." I did this to add some legitimacy to Bronya's really specific upbringing, giving it an additional reason outside of just tradition, with the previous Supreme Guardian always attempting to find this lost child to assist them, basically being a good luck charm and a supposed guaranteed worthy successor should anything happen. There's also another reason why I implemented this, but we'll get to that soon enough. This session was mostly just world building as Wildfire, now joined by Svarog, starts planning their moves going forward. Things go mostly according to Elio's script, with Bronya deciding to confront Cocolia alone, which would then lead to her getting dragged to where the Stellaron is later on. It's at this point that the players had an important question to ask, that being, what is the deal with Cocolia? The specific question that they asked was,
is there any reason that she would benefit from keeping the Stellaron here?
With every Belobog NPC answering, no, of course not. And with one knowledge check later, they figured out, or remembered, that the Stellaron has corruptive properties on people's minds. I'm personally really glad that I was able to move this reveal to this late in the story, since it really amped up the stakes and clarified what a legitimate mystery was for the players. Not a complicated one with a super interesting answer, but it was enough to get the players excited for the final act. Archon specifically was relieved, since this linked her job with Wildfire's goals, meaning she no longer felt conflicted about starting a potential rebellion. She's in this 100% of the way now. With that, we still have a problem to solve. We, as in myself, not the players. If you have an elephant's memory, you'll remember that we're missing a key character that players skipped over. Serval. My initial plan to replace her was to get Svarog to hack into the gate leading them outside the city, as opposed to getting Serval to do it. But that doesn't really work since they can't sneak him into the fort. I mean, sure, they could just muscle through it, but I didn't really want to have any more supplemental encounters if I could avoid it. Tension was building, after all, so I decided to make Bronya direct the party to her in case she didn't respond within 20 hours of her leaving to confront her mother. Lo and behold, that ended up happening, and they ended up visiting Serval's shop, with a deal of hesitation in case that she was the type to end up turning them in. Turns out she got a letter from Bronya roughly summarizing the situation and the direction that she and her mother was moving in. Then, the scene in her shop plays out as normal, with Japard suddenly showing up to the shop, prompting the group to hide. He actually got dangerously close on his investigation check to find them, but luckily everything went according to plan, no improvisation needed. I decided to make the next encounter in the Watchpoint fortification optional with good enough social roles. Still the same situation, Serval showed up as a mechanic conducting some maintenance, with the party acting as her quote-unquote assistants. They had two things to dodge to get out of combat. First is the conflict with Lieutenant Dunn, requiring a good enough social role, and second is the ability to sneak past Japard, who had already gotten there. The script deviated when Serval and the party actually managed to convince Lieutenant Dunn to let them through without combat, but they quickly managed to spot Japard near the exit. It would be really difficult to sneak past him. They'd have to do effectively the opposite thing that Sampo did in Session 1. Well, it's a good thing he disappeared when everyone hit the surface world, huh? Still, I was excited to see what they'll think of to sneak past him, since Serval needs to time the door opening to get them out, meaning they'll need to send some kind of signal for her to open it. My player's response to that problem was a bit different than I'd hoped. Instead of doing any of that, they decided that they should talk it out with Japard instead. In hindsight, that does seem like the more viable option, especially given the fact that they had only been told that he's a do-it-by-the-books types by Serval, as opposed to them seeing it firsthand when they should have gotten caught by him way back at the first session. But let's be honest with ourselves, we don't even need to see the diplomacy roll to see how this goes down. Japard has respect for them and their mission, but he can't take them at face value. He was given an extremely important mission by the Supreme Guardian herself, and regardless of any other information he gets, nothing's going to overrule that until Cocolia gets back home. So, conflict between them was inevitable. Here's how the encounter worked. Serval was still controllable, and she'd need to use a basic interact action on her turn next to the terminal she had started at. This would open or close the gate, but the gate took time. It would only open or close at the start of a round, with one round containing everyone's turn. Think of it like a cycle in terms of the actual game's rules. If the players were the only ones outside the castle walls when the door is closed, then the encounter ends early, and they manage to escape. But the door starts closed, so it will only be open at the start of round 2. So the player's plan was to open the door as soon as possible, then keep them out for the entirety of round 2. But you can't keep them out for too long, since one of the guards might break a hole in the wall, leaving the original escape strategy invalid. In hindsight, there's no universe in which the guards would do this, since it would be sacrificing the safety of those inside, but I didn't think about that at the time. Japard's build was exactly what you'd expect it to be. Shields upon shields upon shields, with some ice theming. I used another second strike archetype called Bulwark, which handles all the shields, while I combined it with the Winter Blossom archetype, which fits the ice theme. The Bulwark archetype also has some fun styles where they give up their shield to achieve a variety of utility or damaging effects, but I didn't give him anything like that. He embodied the flavor text of that archetype, describing, "Your team cannot fall until you do, so you simply will not fall." I didn't put the players at an action disadvantage, like when they fought Bronya, They didn't want to be here long, and considering Gepard's build, they knew if they fought him, it would be a while. So, door strategy it was. The combat starts with Gepard slamming his fist into the ground, causing a wide wall of ice to shoot out of the ground, blocking the party's path. Seal had a stance that let her move through walls, Zendel was mobile enough on his own, and Serval wasn't coming with. But Archon's best option was to spend some actions on Open the Path to break her way through. She kept Gepard locked in combat while the others ran past him. Meanwhile, Zendel had abilities that let allies move on his own turn, meaning they could take her through the gate at the last second. But first, the allies had to group next to the gate before it opened, which they did relatively well. The walls that Gepard placed ended up backfiring on his allies, preventing them from moving quickly to catch up with the party. The door opens, and lo and behold, the entire party gets through. There's only one problem. With Gepard being a boss character, not only does he get multiple health bars, but multiple turns as well. Meaning that even if one player held him off before escaping, someone else would have to do the same thing to stall him on his second turn to make sure he doesn't get through. My players didn't think that far in the future, and so weren't able to stop him from following them outside. With Gepard and the party on the other end of the castle wall, the combat would inevitably go on. But we have things to do, and we want to move on to the final boss fight as quickly as possible. So the players attempt one last diplomacy check to get him to give up on them. Unfortunately, it's just not in his character to give up now, so no matter what they roll in, they got a natural 20. Okay, fuck. How about this? Instead of persuading him through character-breaking amounts of charisma, the 1 in 20 chance instead manifested as fragmentum monsters suddenly descending upon the wall, forcing Gepard to stay back and defend. The players, now actually really liking him, didn't want to just leave him hanging as they left, so they ended up slashing through as many monsters as they can before they left to find the Stellaron. It wasn't long before they found a bright blue light piercing through the snowstorm, resting at the top of a nearby mountain. On the way up, they see destroyed machinery of all kinds. There's no time for a history lesson, though. They have a job to finish. Cocolia, as a boss, had a whopping 5 health bars. While normally the amount of health bars would equal the amount of turns you would get in a single round, I decided to forego giving her an extra turn this round because I just straight up don't agree with that mechanic, at least as an all-encompassing rule. I think it works great for group encounters, but if you have an encounter that's intentionally mismatched in how much HP is available, you should try and keep the turns even anyways. In this case, with the encounter being set to world weight, the highest cinematic weight an encounter could have, a single health bar was a whopping 26 HP, meaning Cocolia's health maxed out at 105 HP. Additionally, whenever you reduce even a single health bar to 0, you can't deal any more damage to them until it's their turn again. Although, they are in a dizzied state, which means that they can't do anything until it's their turn again, meaning they can't use any sort of reversal actions. As you might expect, this battle took a really long time. It was the latter half of Session 6, all of Session 7, and nearly all of Session 8. With that being said, I don't think there's any need to separate this boss by session. Instead, I'll separate it by phase. Cocolia gets her chance to monologue at the party, saying that this is all for the greater good, and after humanity is transformed by the Stellaron, they will all live in eternal peace in their own winter wonderland. Of course, the party wasn't convinced, but they weren't bored either. Seal was particularly pissed off since her girl's in a trance right now. Oh, yeah, Bronya wasn't initially available at the start of the encounter. She was put in a trance state due to the Stellaron's corrupting influence, so the party had to damage her a couple times before she became available to them. This was particularly annoying because she has the high ground, and the players will have to dodge walls of rubble to get to her position. But we're getting ahead of ourselves here. Cocolia steels herself for battle, and the party charges up the mountain. One of the optional rules for creating bosses is to remove their archetype passive ability in exchange for a form's passive and unique actions to be added to all of their stances. I chose the control form, which at the time was the strongest form in the game. I may potentially be debated on that point, but just listen to what this does. First is the passive. Increase the range of the style this form is attached to by 3, or remove its dead zone. And that's it for the passives. Really, that's it. Its unique action is Suppression, with multiple tiers and values of 3. Each lets you move 1 space and generate a single control token. Everything that I've listed so far is the exact same in 2nd edition. The only difference is the effects of these control tokens. Currently, you can spend a control token in reaction to an enemy using an action. Spend 1 to copy that action, although with a relatively low power ceiling. Spend 2 to dodge that action, which lets you or an ally within range negates any of the effects that action might have had on them. Or 3 to parry it, which instantly stops the action entirely and does 2 damage to the person who tried it. This is pretty good. I mean, parry can be oppressive, especially with long range, but if you've spent enough resources on it, and since you can only use control tokens once a turn, it's not that bad. But in this version of the game, you spend 1 control token to negate an action within range, which is the same thing as parry, but without the damage and for 1/3 of the cost. As a reminder, you only need a single 3-up to get 1 of these, and this can negate any action. If you had a 9+ action to use on someone, you better make sure they didn't pay their tiny action tax a turn before. Or even a turn before that if there was no high value actions for them to use their previous control token on. Although in this instance, they likely wouldn't even negate your action. No, they'd spend 2 control tokens to steal your action, which has the effects of negate and copy, without the power ceiling. As a reminder, since this was the effect of a token that you could use at any time and not a passive of the form, that means that you could hold on to the tokens indefinitely and benefit from them in any of your stances. So yeah, Cocolia had access to generated control tokens literally every single time it was her turn, regardless of what stance she was in. And since she was a solo boss, that means she was the only enemy, meaning every other turn was her turn. Plus, all of her stances benefited from the insane range boost of control form. Cocolia, especially in Phase 1, was quite possibly the most evil boss fight I could have made. She also wielded a rifle with a bayonet like Bronya because I forgot that she used the engine key even in Phase 1. Oops! Her strongest stance uses the plan form from the Second Strike expansion, which started with a pool of 13, which you then split into 2 to 5 different values for your action dice that turn. Since most of the important decision making you make in this game revolves around what random dice you roll at the start of your turn, the ability to create a stance with a certain combo in mind that's absolutely guaranteed is really, really strong. A little boring too, if you ask me. Every turn in that stance was doing 3 trick shots with the Ricochet style, and another 3 to generate a control token, and a final 1 to do a basic attack, which, combined with the old passive of Ricochet style, 3 obstacles within 1 to 3 range of enemies, and a line of sight on everyone else, each turn was spent dealing 14 damage, plus she gets a control token, which basically means that the highest cost action that the party rolled next turn would be basically irrelevant, since it was a 90% chance it would just get negated. And since every action targeted at least 2 enemies, challenges didn't work to direct her damage towards a single player, since that only forces you to include one of your targets as the challenged player. And since this damage was separated into 11 hits, even if she was maxed out on weakness tokens the previous turn, she would always be able to discard all of them. The only real limitation was the nearby obstacles that she needed to destroy for Ricochet style, which she could easily generate a ton of them with a different stance having turret style, which would generate 1 trap per action if she committed her whole turn to it. I don't remember what form I put with it, but I know it was one that involved a lot of shoving, which let her deal tons of damage with the traps directly due to its passive increasing the amount of damage traps do. And none of this is even mentioning how many super tokens she was generating. Oh my lord. She'd often spend those tokens controlling the mech, which would deal 5 damage to every enemy in a 4x4 area, at a discounted price of 5 super tokens, as opposed to most supers which normally cost 10. I think she used that super like 5 or 6 times during this combat. which is actually kind of throwing on my part, considering that the average turn in her Ricochet plan stance would generate up to 7 control tokens. So yeah, she was really strong. Also, Ricochet style passive was nerfed after this. I didn't request that one myself. Unlike the control token nerfs, which I did personally request, although Vel was the actual one who came up with the solution. My request was simply for it to be majorly nerfed. Anyways, back to the climactic boss fight. This was the only fight in Epilogue that actually got someone knocked down, if I remember correctly. Maybe that 5-hour-long hell encounter got someone taken out, but I don't remember. That entire thing is a blur to me, especially towards the latter half. The person who was downed in this encounter was, ironically, Bronya. That's right, the ultimate familial betrayal, punishment for not conforming to her mother's will for a better tomorrow. I did this not because of any of that dramatic stuff, but because she was just the best option available. Archon wanted to be at low or even 0 HP with her punk passive and bleeding style. Zindel was a tank who brought very little utility outside of spreading healing and weakness tokens, two things she was already fantastic at dealing with, and Seal had a stance where she spammed copies of herself around the field and dealt recoil damage whenever her copies were destroyed, or when she herself was damaged. And it wasn't an insignificant amount of recoil, so she just left Seal to herself, trying to stay out of range when possible. After all, she's just some kid from the underground. What could she possibly do? She would come to regret that decision. But before that, she was getting her ass handed to her by Archon. She may not have been on super low HP, but I made the mistake of damaging her to about 1/2 and letting her generate super tokens. It's time to introduce Archon's super, Chokehold stance. See, unlike most supers, which is just an unblockable action spent on your turn with 10 or more of your super tokens, Archon's was a unique stance, which would constantly drain her HP in return to giving her access to some super strong abilities and passives. First, she would challenge an adjacent enemy and grapple them. This challenge had the special property of making it impossible to be removed by any means until Archon broke or left her chokehold stance. Cocolia would also remain locked next to Archon, being unable to move by any traditional means. It went so far as to disable any actions that even had movement in them, meaning that she couldn't even benefit from them in other ways. The only way that she could move was by pushing or pulling Archon around, because no matter what's happening, as long as she's grappled, she will always remain next to her. This prompted her to fire wildly at Archon, but as she was, she's slowly taken farther and farther towards the cliff's edge, until eventually, as she reaches towards 0 HP on her second health bar, Archon uses one of her finishing moves, which are special actions available only in her chokehold stance. They don't have any traditional cost, but they do break her stance when she uses them, meaning her super effectively ends immediately. There was only one problem. Her finishers aren't supers, but rather normal actions. And normal actions... Cocolia uses her control token to negate the finishing move, ripping Archon from the edge in the process. Now, she still fell down, and her second HP bar was depleted regardless due to ring-out damage. I ask Zindel's player a simple question. Will Zindel follow?
Yeah, if he can.
So I describe Zindel immediately leaping off the cliff to chase after the two.
Okay, wait, I didn't say that.
No, okay, you won't take damage from this. Let me cook.
Okay.
As everyone is tumbling down the cliff, the Stellaron begins to fuse with Cocolia's body. Ice spreads across her chest, then limbs, then neck. Archon plunges her hand into her chest, shattering the ice on the surface in a desperate attempt to pry the Stellaron out of her. But the moment her hand touches what she thinks is the Stellaron, a flash of light blinds the falling party. Archon sees a vision of Cocolia as a small child floating in space, while Zindel sees the shadows of children across a wintry wasteland. Cocolia looks onto the small floating planetoid containing a fiery lance embedded inside of it. She says that she's not strong enough to save the people of Epilogue. Meanwhile, the children look on to Zindel, asking him to save them. He can't see their faces, but he can tell in the tone of their voice that while they may be pleading, they aren't crying. They're just too tired for that anymore. Zindel speaks to them.
I know what I have to do. It's in my programming.
Archon speaks to her.
You were dealt a bad hand, but you don't have to worry about protecting them anymore.
Okay, but like what does she do?
I just try and comfort her, give her a hug, I don't know.
No, like all these times to have of all the times to have a player moment. She looks at the lance impaled in the planetoid and says, "I'm just not strong enough."
Dude, I'm not gonna stab the kid.
No, it's an Excalibur thing. Pull it out.
Oh, shit. Okay, yeah. She pulls out the lance. She pulls it out.
And as that happens, Archon pulls her hand out of the now transformed Cocolia's chest. But she's not holding the Stellaron. Instead, she's holding the very same lance that she saw in her vision. Meanwhile, Zindel sheds fiery orange tears. The metal giant overlooking their battle shivers as Cocolia has lost control. But Archon doesn't know how to control it with a device like this. Why would she? Luckily, someone came in for the save. The frosty blue eyes of the giant shut down before gleaming a scarlet red. A familiar voice echoes through the mountains. Control obtained. Svarog, who is trailing behind the party this whole time, hacks into the engine of creation now that Cocolia wasn't there to hold him back anymore. He uses the hand of the giant to lift Archon and Zindel back on the battlefield, while Cocolia's frozen, distorted form rises from the depths of the snowstorm all on its own. But now, our heroes are stronger, and as such, they have both gained a fourth stance.
We made a choice, go fight against your fate!
Archon now wields the key to the engine of creation and gains the engine's key stance. It's comprised of the power form and gunmetal style. Archon's player was always considering making one of her archetypes Gunkata since it fit her vibe, so I figured this would be a way to help him experience that since gunmetal is normally a Gunkata style. The style and form synergize fairly well. Power form cuts your standard movement in half, while full metal has a crazy 3 to 6 range. How does a lance get a 6 range, potentially 10 depending on the ammo type? The answer is it extends now. Really cool, don't worry about it. As for Zindel, well, you see, that Child of Belobog prophecy wasn't just a myth. Someone, somewhere on Jarilo-VI, just before the Stellaron was placed on the planet, was able to inscribe this magic for later use, so long as the legend it's connected to lives on. But the peculiar thing about this myth is that, as time changes, details are lost, and those fine details end up making all the difference. As the centuries passed, the people of Jarilo-VI believed space travel to be impossible. At this point, the population was confined entirely to Belobog, since everything else was wiped out. As such, the idea of the Child of Belobog needing to be a child born in Belobog never occurred to those telling the legend as time went on, because from their perspective, any child alive on Belobog surely must have been born there. The second detail is the definition of child. Since this is the last real requirement, let's break this down. Child implies a form of childhood, or growing up, so mechanical life forms are out since they don't really undergo that process. As for measuring childhood, it's just the amount of years alive, of course. Absolute oldest is 17, but the prophecy would likely mention if they're a teenager, meaning it's more likely that they're under
13.
With Zindel being an artificial human, they did count under the selection process, despite their strange appearance. Even though they came from off-world, the perspective of the people of Belobog made that fact irrelevant. Finally, the fact that Zindel is an artificial human means that he's much younger than he looks and acts. At a mere 8 years old, Zindel was, by Belobog's definition, a child's age. With this twist of fate bringing about miraculous circumstances, Zindel ended up becoming the fated Child of Belobog. Zindel's new Tears of Belobog stance was comprised of the Thorns form and the Crying style. This is an incredibly strong stance for Zindel. Thorns' passive punished enemies for hitting him when they had a shield, and their main archetype passive was constantly giving shields out to themselves and their allies. Other than the new stances, the players have now gained access to the Engine of Creation super that Cocolia was using during the first phase. But our heroes aren't the only ones who've changed. Cocolia has now gained 4 new stances, replacing Phase 1's initial 3, which does mean there's no more ricochet shot spamming, although she did have Control Form's passive on all of her new stances. What's worse for our heroes is that she's also now gained the fused Winter Blossom archetype passive, which would constantly give her enemies weakness tokens within her range during her turn. Also, she had a replacement for the Engine of Creation super, being Meteor Rain. It was the same cost as the Punch super, with 5 super tokens, but dealt 1 less damage and the ability to cover 2 3x3 areas instead of just 1 4x4. And honestly, even with all of that, I do wish this version of Cocolia was stronger. Or maybe I wish her Phase 1 was weaker? Our heroes band together to fight the raid boss. That first second phase health bar was a slugfest, lasting far longer due to the players focusing on getting and keeping Bronya up. But after her third health bar was taken down, something amazing happened. Seal takes her turn, the last ally to go for this round. She chooses her Butterfly Flurry stance, named after her burst, a stance comprised of the Power Form and Lightning style. She rolls her dice, being 2d10 and a d4. The results are 4, 10, 10. The maximum possible roll. Additionally, with her Fused War Dancer archetype passive, which was busted in this patch by the way, increased 2 of those numbers' values by 2, leaving her with a whopping 6, 10, and 12. She raises her scythe and spends her 6 on a 5-up Deadly Dance. Let's break down what we just saw. Deadly Dance allows Seal to teleport 2 spaces, twice, then deal 1, then 2 damage. But that's not all. With each damage instance, she gains 1 speed token with the Lightning style passive. At least, she would if not for the Power Form passive, which converts each of those 1 speed token instances into power tokens. This should let her deal 3 damage while storing 2 power tokens for another potential 2 damage. She steps forward, preparing to leap towards Cocolia for her assault, but stumbles when a sudden ice spike stops her momentum. Her action is cancelled by Cocolia's only held control token. But why? It's just a 5-up action. Shouldn't she use her once per turn control token usage on the 10 or 12? See, it's very simple. She needs to get within her range in order to hit Cocolia, and I know what other actions she has access to. Seal rebalances herself, regains her momentum, and spends her 10 on an 8-up Deadly Dance, getting within range, slashing at Cocolia with blinding speed, but she misses her first attack due to a partially frozen hand. She raises her scythe, ready to take everything from the frozen queen, who is already staggered and off guard from her rapid assault. Seal spends her 12 on a 9-up Crush. Crush is a unique action provided by the Power Form that lets you deal 3 damage. Why so little damage for such a steep cost? Well, that's because of its additional effects. Crush is unblockable by Iron tokens, enemy abilities, and control tokens. This is why I used the control token on the first Deadly Dance, because otherwise she would be able to use 2 of these back to back. 9-up Crushes also gain an additional effect, being you can spend any number of power tokens on this hit. With the 2 power tokens generated, plus the ones that she had stocked up from previous turns, when she swings her scythe down, tearing a gash into Cocolia's inky stomach, she deals a whopping 12 damage in a single strike. But Seal's not done yet. Guess how many super tokens she had now? In this turn, Seal effectively did an astonishing 30 damage, well eclipsing the Tyrant's entire 4th health bar. And yet still, Cocolia rises from the ground. this time appearing on the other edge of the map, since you can choose any space adjacent to the map's edge to bring yourself back after they've been ringed out. But she still has a problem. Moving away from one problem damage dealer just puts her closer to another one. Archon's on low HP from brief focus damage during her chokehold stance, and she hasn't been missing out on combat since then. With how many super tokens she has now, a good roll on her next turn can grant her enough to enter chokehold stance again. Cocolia rolls, and the result isn't bad. Her plan is to use the Guardian's Whales' stance, since that has the Lightning form as part of it. Lightning form's passive lets her deal increased damage to Archon, who has iron tokens to block. But even if she dedicated her entire turn to focus firing Archon, it still wouldn't be enough with the resources that she has. So she spends one action to get a control token to deny that upcoming big punk action. Then she backhands Archon aside, using the 5-up to deal 3 damage and 1 knockback. Finally, she conjures an ice storm around her to hit Archon again for 3 more damage, despite her just getting pushed out of range. Archon takes her turn next, and tries to rush in with her knockdown Shadow stance. Shadow form has you roll 6d4. She was aiming for as many 3-ups as possible to use knockdown's Take It on the Chin action, which makes enemies damage you in exchange for dealing high damage for its low cost. Unfortunately, she didn't roll very well, and while she was able to get in easily while discarding her weakness tokens quickly with her many attacks, with her denied large action due to her control token, she wasn't able to do any more than 4 damage in a single turn. She was able to challenge Cocolia with her Angel Archetype passive though, meaning she'd have to either spend an action to discard it, or focus on her for her entire next turn. Cocolia was glad to do the latter. She chooses her same stance, rolls, and it's shit. Like, it's really bad. I rolled a d10 and 2d8 and I didn't get a single result higher than a 4. All she really was able to accomplish that turn was tickling Archon and generating another control token. "You're only delaying the inevitable," she shouts, beginning to charge her action denial-based magic, until Bronya used a control token of her own to deny Cocolia's control token generation. This meant that she didn't have a control token at the start of the next turn. Now, it's Seal's turn. My players decide to make her use Butterfly Flurry stance again. By all accounts, this should be a mistake. She's halfway across the map, and that's her slowest stance. There's no way she can make it to Cocolia in time. She rolls her dice. 2, 10, 10. 2 turns in a row, double 10s. The chance of this happening is less likely than pulling 2 5-stars in a single 10 pull with no pity. The Supreme Guardian opens her mouth to yell at her daughter, but before she can say anything, she swings her head at the blur in the snow. Seal appears at the edge of Cocolia's range. She spends her 2, boosted to a 4 with her War Dancer passive, to gain 2 speed tokens and 2 power tokens. Additionally, she has another passive called Agile Build, which gives her another power and speed token at the start of the round, just enough to enter within range. Then comes an 8-up Deadly Dance, and now, after years of oppression, smuggling, and fighting to survive, Seal gets to let out the last of her rage against the Overworlders. And finally, she puts everything into one last 9-up crux, launching her directly into the air for 9 whole damage. But it's not enough. Cocolia has only taken 7 damage since before Seal's last turn. From the 13 damage she dealt, Cocolia still has 6 HP. The Queen looks down at her former subject. She knows she's out of stamina. She knows she can reach the ground to keep pushing forward. She knows nothing. Seal just gained 7 super tokens. With the 1 excess she didn't need to use last super, she's left with 8. But she can't fire a full-on super with 8, right? And not even the special Mech Punch super kills here. Luckily for her, she didn't need either of those, because of a little mechanic that I've been keeping secret from you all, though not my players, obviously. Chain Shift is one of the basic metered actions that anyone with super tokens can use. It consumes all of your super tokens, regardless of how many or how little you have. In return, it will give you an action die equal in value to the amount of super tokens you just spent. In this case, this means Seal gets 1-8 action. She takes a deep breath before briefly disappearing, and then...
Disappear among the sea of butterflies. Illusions of the past.
The inky void around her loses form and flies off of Cocolia's body, splattering all across the ground, before she comes crashing down, instantly shattering the ice constructs on her body. The shards dig into her limbs and chest. She's completely immobilized now. In the front, she has a giant slash wound from Seal's super last round. And in that fissure of blood lies the Stellaron. Seal immediately grabs it and chucks it at Zindel, who barely manages to catch it. Bronya runs to her mother. It's obvious that these wounds are fatal, and that's not even counting the damage from the freezing cold she's now exposed to. Cocolia looks at her daughter, the same one that she thought she had to give up on for humanity's future. In a strange sense, she's relieved that she lost. She apologizes, saying she's a foolish Supreme Guardian who constantly made the wrong choices. Bronya couldn't deny that statement. Seal passionately agrees, though obviously she kept that to herself given the circumstances. Still, Bronya rejects what her mother said. Not the facts of the statement, but the feeling. Don't say those things about yourself. You're my mother. She smiles. I wish we could live in harmony with the ice. Bronya sobs. I wish so too. I'm so sorry. It's okay. If anyone can lead Belobog to a brighter tomorrow, it's you. Bronya can only cry in response. By the time she's able to see through her tears again, her mother has already passed. She takes more time to weep. But eventually, she stands up, like she always does. And what happens next is back on Elio's script. Bronya declares that the people of Belobog will get a different story than the truth. Even if some people know in their hearts that something is wrong with what they've received, they should mostly accept it anyway, or at least leave it be. Eventually, the truth will be revealed when the overworld and underworld are culturally one again, and Bronya is ready for the emotional backlash and hatred that her late mother will receive. But for now, stability is the most important thing. Bringing the overworld and underworld together again will be a hard thing for people to wrap their heads around, especially the younger generation. But only when Bronya solved their animosity for each other can she move on. Bronya and Seal prepare to head down the mountain, but the Astral Express crew stops them. It's been a long day, and we shouldn't have to walk home. Right on time, the Astral Express lands on the now war-torn mountain. So, everyone climbs inside and takes a ride back to the city. Meanwhile, the Stellaron is passed over to Welt, who begins the containment process. The party is beyond tired. Archon put her all in and was nearly knocked out a dozen times. Zindel had to endure freezing temperatures for several days after literally never experiencing winter on their home planet ever. Bronya is completely emotionally devastated, and Seal wonders why the hell weren't they using the spaceship the whole time. But after some freshly brewed high-quality hot chocolate, or coffee for those who prefer it, they relax as they make their way back to Belobog. The Astral Express crew end up staying on Jarilo-VI for a while, partially to conserve power, since sealing a Stellaron takes a lot, but more so they meet the aftermath of their success. Plus, Welt and Himiko were pretty excited to meet some of the others while picking up souvenirs for Pom Pom. Bronya gave them a Medal of Honor, usually used for an upcoming sports competition, a mini-Olympics of sorts. It ended up being cancelled this year due to the huge increase in entrants from the underground complicating the setup. Natasha gave them a stuffed animal she'd usually give to sick patients, but now that she's back in the overworld, it won't be hard for her to fill back up on her stock. Japard and Serval give them a custom-made clockwork guitar toy. Like, imagine those little toy guitars you give to like 6-year-olds? It's like that, but more steampunk. Seal just gave them another bag of chips since they seemed to like it so much, so that joke got a conclusion too. Svarog and Clara got them a little flare toy. The last person to give a gift was Sampo, who left them an IOU. Look, he's a busy guy. The market has completely changed now that the overworld and underworld are connected again. He's gotta think of some new strategies. With that, there was one final thing to do. My players found it a bit disconcerting that they were the target for two of their greatest powers and prophecies, and they're just gonna leave with the powers intact. So many of the engineers and mechanics band together in order to take apart the key for the engine of creation. They basically separate the weapon from the controller. As for the Child of Belobog thing, there's really nothing the party can do about that. Plus, 90% of people took it as a folktale anyways, including Bronya, so she didn't mind if they just kept that story to themselves and kept the new powers as they went off on their merry way. Finally, as the Astral Express gathered themselves in the train cart one last time, I confirmed to my players that no, you don't get to take Seal with you. They wave goodbye through the window and leave Jarilo-VI a healthier planet. Alright, that's enough drama. I still have stuff to talk about. As a game designer, as opposed to a writer. Remember the whole point of this campaign? I wanted to prove to my friends that they shouldn't deny playing a Genshin campaign on the entirely shallow grounds that it's Genshin. But before I gave the big reveal to them, I had to get some general feedback about the last couple sessions. First of all, they loved the gameplay, which I loved as well. They were so hyped when they got their 4th stance midway through the final battle. Even though Archon didn't actually end up using hers. And also Zadel's super was really underpowered and needed a buff. We'd also have to talk about how we'd run the campaign moving forward, particularly when it came to the game updating constantly. Luckily, that issue mostly sorted itself out. By the time you're watching this, 2nd edition is out, so you can just play it and we don't really have to worry about that issue anymore. But after all of that, I finally got to say it. I introduced the idea in a very similar way I did in this video, mentioning my frustration for nobody being interested in the Genshin campaign, and how I then got an idea following that feedback, to which I immediately got the response.
Wait, that was Genshin the whole time?
And honestly, I should have said yes. I really, really should have said yes, to see his grip on reality just crumble before him. But I didn't. I immediately corrected him and told them that there was Star Rail story instead. After which, I got to have the extremely fun experience of showing them the actual character designs. As you can see, one of them is an artist, and he wanted to draw many of the characters throughout the campaign, so I got to show him the official designs. Their reactions to the designs were... they were really good. Mostly because they don't mesh very well with the anime aesthetic blob, which they've been pretty upfront about from the beginning. So they complained about the normal things you see people complain about, like, why does Bronya look so young, etc, etc. Obviously, they liked Svarog's design a lot because he's not that. No, their best reaction was to Sampo's design, though. I showed them him, and they just immediately and instantly responded.
That shit is not Sampo.
Sampo's Bourbon from Metro.
He's Bourbon from Metro.
Bourbon, but if
Bourbon
Bourbon was
from
like
Metro.
a
Yeah.
No, okay. Regardless, things ended about the way that you'd expect. I don't think that it's hard to predict that I'd rather run this campaign for longer as opposed to going back to the Genshin one, even though that one does have really cool homebrew. We even did another one-shot after this going over Argenti's story quest, but that's a story for another time. On the note of homebrew though, here's my rules for super tokens. It's in the homebrew channel in the official Panic at the Dojo Discord server right now, although I'd already posted it earlier and some tweaks have been changed since my initial post. My players adored the system, saying that if they ran their own sessions, there's no way they'd be playing without it. An important note to remember is that I ended up making custom supers as opposed to using the ones in the book, so I don't know if it balances very well with the book supers in mind, or if it's actually balanced well at all. I could easily see some mixed up exploits with stance shift, for example, because we never actually used that action throughout our entire campaign, so it hasn't actually been tested. Finally, if you want any tips for hosting sessions of your own, the main things that I learned is that a lot of people need to reevaluate what exactly you need to tell your players. It's okay to break immersion a little bit if it means you get the story moving along. And that's just about it. I have some more for you, though. Allow me to get serious for a moment. One of the reasons that I wanted to host this campaign so badly was because I wanted to show my friends a view of the other side, so to speak. I wanted to be able to share something that I really loved because I know they'd never go through and play the original game. The primary reason why they'll likely never play Honkai Star Rail is because it's a gacha game. And alongside the gambling stuff, that also means that when the game's not profitable anymore, it no longer exists. If you were a fan of Tribe 9, you'll never get to play it again at the end of this year. But if you live in the EU, you could change gaming history by going to stopkillinggames.com and signing the linked European Citizens Initiative. You could change gaming history in less than 2 minutes by helping pass a law that prevents studios from being able to disable games like this. Even multiplayer ones. You may say that's impossible, since that would require them to host servers forever, but that's not true. Many multiplayer games released as far back as the 90s are still 100% functional even today. It won't retroactively save games that already exist, sorry Tribe 9, but your next favorite gacha game may have the potential to outlive even their own developers. There's also a UK petition ending July 14th. Hey, that's actually really soon. When is... Oh god, the Citizens Initiative ends July 31st? I know, it's not a lot of time. But this actually started many months ago, but some ex-Blizzard employee ended up spreading misinformation and basically ruining everything. Typical. StopKillingGames.com will be linked at the very top of the description. Before anything else, even the system that I played in this, because really, it's the most important thing on there. But I have some fun stuff to talk about too. First, I'll be streaming my Archer polls right when the Fate Collab event drops July 11th. I've been waiting for this for so long. I'm a free-to-play with over 300 polls stored up. This is the one time I get to live like an actual gacha YouTuber. I know it's generic, but just let me have this. He's my goat. I gotta go for it. Once the polls are done, I'll be discussing the campaign more, including potentially even some spoilers about the future. Ooh. It'd be fun to chat with others about ideas about how to adapt later parts of the story. I know I'll have to be extra creative when it comes to Herta Space Station, for instance. But mainly, I'll be hosting the stream to gauge whether or not I'll continue to do this. It was super fun for me to make, but it also took 8 months of my free time. And frankly, I need to get a job. But if I get a job streaming, then that works out. If you want to know more about my players, one of them has an art channel, and he recently uploaded a speed paint of him making Archon's character sprite in Blender 3D. Yes, the 2D image was made in Blender 3D, a years-old version at that. It's genuinely a fascinating experience seeing him work. A link will be included in the description, just under links for purchasing Panic at the Dojo's digital and physical releases. Panic at the Dojo is just great for numbers nerds like me. A lot of people tend to take TTRPGs in a very theater kid direction, which is still really cool, to be clear, but when I play TTRPGs, sure, I'll roleplay if it's a dramatic moment or if I have something really funny to say, but otherwise, 100% of my brain power is dedicated to beating some ass. And I know I'm not the only one. And if you think you're one of those, or if you have a lot of those players, buy Panic at the Dojo. It's seriously just awesome. If you do, visit the linked official Discord server, where you can chat with like-minded TTRPG enjoyers. Just be sure to read the rules and FAQ. And be nice. You can also find my Super Token homebrew there, as well as in the description directly, because I know joining Discord servers for one piece of content or info is really, really annoying. And with all of that, this has been... Who is this? I mean, I know I'm making a new channel for this video, but I actually was never sure what to name it yet. I mean, obviously you know. This video's already been uploaded at this point. Something referencing Star Rail. So director, star, something. Blazer? No. Drifter? Sprint? No. Maybe just director Starfall? Stardust? No, I need something a little bit more original. I mean, I don't even have custom art for the profile picture. What am I supposed to do without legs? Wait. Legs. Original. Star. I am the original director, Starwalker.